Ready to get down to business? Join seasoned entrepreneur, community leader, and Army veteran Scott Shalom Klein, who will take you behind the scenes with those who work in America's small business scene and speak with leaders making an impact, creating jobs, and telling their story in entrepreneurship. So let's get down to business. On AM 560, The Answer, here's your host, Shalom Klein.
We're all about small business jobs and entrepreneurship and business. We are all about small business here, and I'm super excited to jump into today's program. As always, you get on my website, shalomklein.com. Of course, getting your forever podcast app to get down to business, but be sure to subscribe, rate, and share so your colleagues don't miss a single episode. Kicking off today's program, which is going to be jam-packed, is a recognized expert on leadership and strategy who has just co-authored one of the most anticipated business books of the year. Our guest is Dr. Patrick Leddin, a former Army Airborne Ranger, although I don't know if you could ever be former, and infantry officer, a senior consultant at KPMG and Franklin Covey, and a current faculty member at Vanderbilt University. He's a co-author, along with the legendary James Patterson, in the new book, Disrupt Everything and Win, the proven and effective way to harness change into a force for success. Today, Patrick will share insights from his multi-year study on success in the face of disruption, explaining how we can transform change from a jarring setback into a strategic advantage. Welcome to the show, Patrick. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. Very, very excited to have you. So to start, how did this incredible collaboration with James Patterson come about? What was the disruption that brought a best-selling novelist and a leadership professor together to write a business book?
I know, right? It doesn't happen naturally sometimes in the world. So I was teaching at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. Actually, the last 12 years, I was a professor there. And one of the classes I was teaching was leading business through times of crisis. And one particular section of that course every semester was very guest speaker driven. And it just so happens James Patterson is a graduate of Vanderbilt University. And I was able to get him to come and speak to our class. And he came in and he talked about his career. He called the presentation that day to the students, he called it The Power of Disruption, and shared a bit about his career. People may or may not know it. He was in advertising early on. He actually became the president of J. Walter Thompson's ad agency. Actually, he wrote the line, "I'm a Toys R Us kid." And then he blew all that up to focus on writing books. And then he disrupted the publishing industry. And by the time that was done, I was like, I want to study this topic. I want to write a book with him, and I want to see if I can help him and myself disrupt the world along the way.
That is so cool, and I absolutely love that slogan. I was just talking about I'm a Toys R Us kid recently now that I'm seeing Toys R Us popping back up around the nation. So that's so cool.
Some businesses never die. They just keep coming back.
I know, literally. It's awesome. It's great. Patrick, that's absolutely awesome. And we're going to talk later on in the program about contact management because you are a master at that. Your book, Patrick, argues that disruption can become a strategic advantage. What is the core difference between seeing disruption as a setback versus seeing it as fuel for growth?
I think it's a mindset thing. And sometimes we see it as destruction or certainly destructive. I don't want it to have it happen. I'm going to bury my head in the sand. I don't want that the work world is changing or my customer base is changing, or I'm fearful of it. You could look at it that way. Or you could look at it and say, you know what, it's fertile ground. Yes, things are changing, but things are always changing. And I can be the person who says, okay, I'll process the emotions for a moment, but now I'm going to look for the opportunity within this. And I think that if we just kind of approach things from that mindset, and many people who are entrepreneurs do, many people who have tried things and fallen down and gotten back up again do, but sometimes we get in our own head so much that we feel like the world's up against us. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather be in the driver's seat than not.
100%. I mentioned this in the intro, but you are a former Airborne Ranger infantry officer, and you have unique experience with high pressure, chaotic situations. How did your military background influence your approach to researching and defining the 27 positive disruptor moves?
Well, I think in many ways, actually, it's interesting, being in the military or jumping out of planes or doing any of that type of thing, there's lots of disruptions that can happen. But many of those disruptions are pretty well thought through. People think about, okay, if this happens, here's the standard procedures for that. If this happens, you've been trained to do this, and all these type of things. So that's what allows somebody to jump out of a plane and end up in the tree line, or jump out of a plane and end up tangled up with somebody else in the air. And both of those things I've experienced, right? So you don't want those things, but they happen, and you have processes to follow. The challenge we're running into these days is that there's no SOP, there's no standard procedures, there's no training drill, there's no to deal with some of the disruptions that we're dealing with, many of which are fueled by technology. But we go to bed one night and you're in one world, you wake up tomorrow and the economy shifted, or globalization's changed, or the supply chains have shut down, or whatever it might be, or you get a doctor's notice about your last blood test or something. These disruptions are coming at us, and we don't necessarily have a playbook because the rules are being rewritten so quickly.
100%. And the book, as mentioned, offers these 27 positive disruptor moves. What are one or two of these moves that an individual can make today to immediately improve their performance, their resilience, and their results at work?
I wish I'd written these 27 positive disruptor moves earlier in my career. I actually owned a business. I started a business in 2001, which is an interesting year to start a business. And I exited it in 2012. We were given an offer we couldn't refuse to acquire the company. So we went through the acquisition. And in that process of 11 years of starting and building a business, for example, and I did it with my wife. So there's all the dynamics of kind of building a business with your partner as well. But going through all that, I wish I had some of these moves in my mind at the time. They're very simple things. So they're very simple things like own the day. Before you get out of bed that day, just think about like what role you want to play, what result you want to achieve, whatever it might be before your feet even hit the ground, and just own it. Or something like when you feel overwhelmed, maybe your clients are asking for things, your competitors are doing things, your internal company is changing in so many ways. And you're like, gosh, I don't even know what even is real anymore, or what I can count on. Sometimes you could just take a few moments to do a little inventory. Okay, what do you actually have in your hands? What can you do? What resources do you have available? So little disruptive moves like that if you do them routinely, say the hard yes, say this, or say the scary yes, or say the hard no. Those type of things can make a big difference. And one thing we wanted to do is, Patterson and I, is we wanted to give people a study and things that they could research and a process they can follow. We also wanted to give them some things that they could do right away, because sometimes it's hard to make that first move. And we wanted to help people realize, there's a lot of things you could do to make a first move. Here's 27 of them. Give one of them a shot and see what happens.
Yeah. And as you just spoke a moment ago, one of my favorite speeches, one of my favorite books of all time is, Make Your Bed.
Make Your Bed,
from,
sure.
Admiral
McRaven.
And
yeah,
absolutely. And then as you speak, the words of a former commander of mine of do routine things routinely rings loud. And I love everything that you're saying over here. Patrick, you led the disruption project at Vanderbilt. What was the most surprising or maybe a counterintuitive finding that from the multi-year study about what makes people and organizations successful in the face of constant change?
Well, a couple things that I think of. One, in a more of a macro sense, is just in the process of going through the research. So I had a chance to interview 350 folks, 350 people in long form interviews. And these type of discussions, it takes a lot of time to set them up and conduct them, and then go back through and look at the transcript and kind of learn from it. So imagine 350. And one thing we thought is, boy, when we get in here, will there be a few key behaviors that make all the difference? Some people just have certain strengths that make all the difference. And what we found is that there's actually a number of strengths or behaviors that they would do. There's 16 of them, and 16 is a huge number. What I loved about, as we started to dig into, we started realizing nobody nailed these 16 perfectly. Some people were good at a couple of them, and some people were good at other ones, and they were both really disruptive and did amazing things, great things. So that gives me a lot of confidence to know, what, of these 16 things, everybody listening to this has some of them. Some of you are better at casting a vision. Some of you are better at standing, firm in the face of doubters. Some of you are better looking at like the brutal reality of where you stand right now. Some of you are better at rolling up your sleeves and getting your hands dirty. And those are just a few examples, but those are all some of the disruptive behavior strengths that we found. And if you have a couple of them, you can literally change your world or the world. There's no magic combination. And many of you are building businesses, building teams. And if you look across your team, many of these strengths come up. So I think that was one thing at a global level that I found really cool. At an individual kind of closer one-story level, I interviewed one gentleman named Tom Dieri. very quickly. Tom was 22 years old years ago. He was getting out of college. He was going to go be a consultant or work in Manhattan. His disruptive moment was when he was looking at his brother's situation. His brother's on the autism spectrum, and his brother was a couple years younger. He's like, what's he going to do with his life? Fast forward to today, Tom's an entrepreneur, didn't expect to be necessarily. He owns 3 car washes, 100 employees, 90 of them are on the autism spectrum. And when I talked to Tom, I said, hey, what would your 22-year-old self say if he saw your 35-year-old self wearing a red polo and running a car wash? And he said, he would say I'm in the exact right spot. And that just really stuck with me about this idea of like, hey, your time here is short. Make it count in ways that really matter.
Your book addresses the impact of rule-changing technology like AI, artificial intelligence. What's the biggest organizational barrier to harnessing AI as a disruptive force for success rather than letting it become an unexpected crisis?
Yeah, I think, organizationally, so I have a partnership, Patterson and I have a partnership with a company called Franklin Covey, and they turn the content of the book into a course around innovation. And I think what organizations typically deal with is you have the senior leader of the organization, whether it's a global business or it's a regional business or something much smaller than that. But the leader kind of knows where they want to go. So everybody who's running a business listening to this right now, they know where they want to go. They know how they need to pivot or change going forward. What they oftentimes think is they look at the team that they have or the leaders they have and they go, they're really great people doing really good work based upon the business we have right now. But can they make the leap with me? And so I think one of the biggest challenges organizations are running into right now is they're saying, okay, I've got this big strategy that looks great on paper, but can we make the leap with the team we had? And if we can't right now, what can we do to help them make that leap? And what we want people to realize as they're reading the book or going through the Covey course is the idea that you'll never make a big leap as a team, whether you're 10, 100, or 1,000 or more, if it's all on a couple people at the top are the disruptors and everybody else is just kind of looking to them to figure out what to do. What you have to do is you have to help people realize that in their own role, they need to be disruptive. So if I want to change a large company, I've got to get the salespeople to disrupt what they're doing. I've got to get the managers to disrupt what they're doing. I've got to get the developers to disrupt what they're doing. And I also need to get the person who's a receptionist to disrupt what they're doing. And that's a big ask, but I think the potential exists within everybody. And there's organizations right now, if they don't change, there's whole industries. It's going to change dramatically on its own because the status quo is not going to stay that way.
For sure. For the entrepreneur or the leader listening right now who's facing a major unexpected crisis, what's the single best piece of advice that you can give them on how to turn that immediate negative disruption into a strategic opportunity?
So I would suggest the first thing they do is give themselves a little bit of grace to process it emotionally. So something's changing, it's disruptive, you didn't see it coming, whatever it might be. Take a moment and just kind of think about how do you feel about this thing? And it's okay to give yourself a little bit of space to do that because if you don't process your way through that, it's hard to rationally look at something. And if you want to make it fun, kind of think to yourself, if this was an amusement park ride, what would I call this thing? And just kind of name it that. And then from there, the next step is to not act right away. It's actually to discern, to consider what's the why behind our organization? What are we trying to achieve? And then based upon what we're trying to achieve, what role do I need to take on? And in the book, we talk about 5 different roles. So 2 of the roles are more toward change. Like I'm going to embrace this change. I'm going to implement this change. I'm going to change something in my organization based upon that change. And 2 of the roles are actually based upon stability. We're going to say, I know that change is happening and I know the whole industry is chasing it and everybody's doing it, but we're not going to pursue that because that's not who we are. And then the 5th role is more around gathering more information. And what we found as we were going through this is, yeah, there's certainly times where disruption comes along, something really shifts, like the ground beneath you shifts, and you need to be a trailblazer and move out and change your business or change your career path. There's other times where you might say, that's interesting, but I'm going to say no. And what we found is that saying no in the face of disruption is sometimes the most disruptive thing you can do, especially when the crowd is moving a certain direction. So knowing who you are and what you're trying to achieve is really critical. I remember years ago when I didn't have the language for it back in the time, but when I had my business, we were having a meeting and we were talking about the clients we supported, the customers we supported, which all kind of existed in one industry. And then we discussed the type of work we were doing. And the question we kind of at this crossroad was, are we a company that does this type of work for any industry, or we are a company that serves that industry? And that was a conversation we needed to have so we could really decide like which path we want to go down. Because if we try to straddle both paths, one of the worst ways you can cause trouble for yourself strategy wise is try to be everything to everyone or try to straddle and do everything. You got to make choices. That's what strategy is about. So using it as an opportunity to say, okay, which path do we want to go down? What role am I going to take on? And let's start moving out in that direction.
100%. And that's a perfect segue because something I plan to talk about on later on in the program is this idea of time management, contact management too, which I alluded to in just admiring your story in collaboration with James Patterson. But many entrepreneurs are grappling with the feeling that they're constantly putting out fires. What would you say is the tactical advice for structuring a day to ensure you spend more time on strategic disruption and less time on reactive chaos?
Yeah, well, they probably are putting out a lot of fires. That's probably true to some extent. I think a couple things. You got to be careful of the firefighting mentality, constantly putting out fires, because one is if you have team members, they're watching what you're doing, you're modeling for them. They're seeing you're putting a lot of energy into firefighting. They'll do a lot of firefighting too. And the problem sometimes is that great firefighters are great fire starters. So they start creating more problems to put out the fire because that's what's being rewarded and embraced. But if you really want to step back from yourself and say, okay, step back a bit and say, okay, how do I not spend so much time in this firefighting mode? It's a time matrix, Eisenhower matrix, whatever you want to call it. But the idea that we spend our time in one of 4 quadrants, and one of those quadrants is important and urgent, and that's firefighting. And you're going to have to go there sometimes, no doubt. Another quadrant is important but not urgent. And this is where you can do your best thinking, your best innovation, kind of your best relationship building, etc. So you want to live in those 2 quadrants where you're doing important stuff. And yes, you're putting out the fires in quadrant 1, but when you get done with those, you go to quadrant 2 again and do your best thinking and your best work. What you want to avoid is going to the other 2 quadrants, which are the unimportant quadrants. So one of them is not important, but it feels urgent. It feels pressing. So you tend to go there and put out fires there because you haven't really clarified where the line between important and unimportant is. And that's a problem you have to watch out for. And the other one is not important and not urgent. And that's where we tend to go when we're exhausted and worn out and we just want to crash or scroll, on our phone. So the question becomes, how do I define what's important and what's not important, make that really clear to myself and everybody on my team, and do the best job I can to say, okay, I'll fight fires. There's no doubt about it. But when I get done with the fires that are important fires to be put out, I'm not just going to chase any other fire. I'm going to go back and do my best work in the important quadrant where it's important but not urgent.
Patrick, beyond James Patterson, you've worked with many leaders. What's the single most common communication flaw that you've observed in executives who fail to lead their team successfully through periods of change? And please, you do not need to name them.
Yeah. Okay. So I would say a couple things around communication. There's an expression, forgive me for not knowing exactly who said it, but they said the biggest challenge around communication is the illusion that it actually happened. Right. So we think we said something, we think we said it 10 times and people didn't hear it. So I think part of it is getting really clear and staying on message. I think it's important to try to say smart things. Your listeners might be like, really? But no, saying smart things is really important and taking the time to think about them. But also that recognizing that when you say stuff to your team of 5 people, or your team of 100 people, you got to say it more than once because they're just busy. It's not that they're bad people. It's not that they're lazy. It's not that they don't care. It's they're busy. And when you come in and tell them something, they're trying to run it through the filter of how does that impact me right now? And especially when you're talking about something you want them to do, a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months into the future. So it's really important that if you want to be effective at communicating, you need to get clear on your message, stay on your message, use multiple channels to share your message. And don't say, this is the big important thing on Monday, and by Tuesday you're talking about something else, and by Wednesday you forgot all that stuff, and by Friday you're just looking forward to the weekend. You got to figure out what it is and just stay on message. So if it's about, we have to do this every time with every customer, or we need to make sure we tell customers this, or this is something we don't value, so we never should do this, whatever it might be, you just got to define that for yourself, a few key things, and just stay on that message.
Amazing. Patrick, I've really, really enjoyed the conversation. I've learned so much, and I can't wait to stay in touch and hopefully have you back on the program again real soon. I want to give the final word over to you. Is there anything that we've missed over here that we should know about the book or about your collaboration with James Patterson? And once again, how can we find this important read?
Yeah, so the book's called Disrupt Everything and Win. It's available everywhere you would buy books, online or in person. So go out and grab a copy. I'd love it. And just know that the book is not, there's a fair amount about thinking, but the book's not theory. The book's about action. The book's about moving forward, about choosing sometimes the tough path, but persevering through that, because that's the one that's going to make all the difference.
Awesome. Really, really appreciate it, Patrick. We've got still a great lineup, some great content, all about small business jobs and entrepreneurship. You're listening to Get Down to Business. I respond to every message that comes through my website, syklein.com. Get in touch with me. I'd love to hear from you. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.